Welcome to another episode of the Apex Perspective podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with Raul Rodriguez, who's currently the head of product management at Frog. Now, Raul started off his essentially background with engineering, and he later on narrowed it down into product management specifically. But Raul, I'd love to hear your background from your perspective specifically. Can you tell me more about your background and how it led you to getting into product management specifically?
Sure. Yeah. So from the time I was a little kid, like I wanted to make things. I wanted to build things. When I was a little kid and they asked you, what do you want to be when you grow up? I wanted to be an inventor. And as you go through education, it naturally leads to this, engineering as a potential field. And I took on mechanical engineering because I kind of wanted to do whatever I could do. And mechanical engineering is a very general type of engineering. You can apply it in a lot of different ways. And I did that for a time, out of school and into my professional career. But what I realized, after a while was I have interests that like extend beyond just the development of the exact solution. And engineering is a very technical field, and you have to be very, very specific. And that being specific is useful in other areas, but I kind of wanted more. So I went to business school, and when I was in business school, I learned a lot of really cool things about, I would say, like business systems. When you think as an engineer, you think in systems. And so when I went to business school, I said, these are just other systems that kind of operate the way that engineering systems work. And it's kind of a wider purview. And that led me to, somebody in my group saying, hey, do you want to come work at this company, Charles Schwab, being a digital product manager? I was like, what is that? Because early on, that wasn't, this was probably 2010, 2011. Those terms weren't as used. It was usually like a marketing manager or product marketing specialist or whatever it was. And so I got into that field, and as I did, I really loved having that wider purview. I mean, product management is a specific discipline, but it covers a wide range of things you need to solve. And
Right.
Bringing those systems from business school and engineering to bear on that was really rewarding. I kind of realized this is more of what I want.
Right. And an interesting question for you is I actually had the CTO of Aviatrix on. His name is Anir Sengupta very recently. And he said that to really maximize your skill set or whatever you want to do, you have to understand the business side of things and able to do so. One specific example that I brought up specifically was the urgent care industry. So these are doctors, these are essentially people who are in the medical industry that want to maximize their impact. However, there are only 7,000 locations a decade ago. Now, a decade later, there's over 14,000 statewide locations in under 1 decade that happened, right? But why did that happen? It happened because they found a way to make urgent cares profitable. Now they profit around 500 to 800,000 a location, but beforehand, a decade ago, they did not have the same figure. So from your perspective, do you feel as if, or do you think as if that to really maximize your skill set, do you think that having a business understanding really helped you do that?
Oh, absolutely. Because I mean, I would maybe a business understanding is maybe I would be less specific, but an objective understanding. And
Sure.
I think like one of the things that business school and kind of my experiences in product management have taught me is, you really have to kind of dig to find out like why we're doing what we're doing. Like what, I tell people all the time, I say, what is our intention here? Like what exactly in very plain language are you trying to do? Because that's really what you have to set a stake in the ground and work towards. The technical stuff, the specifics, all the detail. I mean, Frog is a very strong design house, right? So the designs are they look great, but they're very particular. They're very specific, right? They're very tailored to a solution. But if you don't know what the solution's intended to accomplish, you could go off on the wrong path very easily, right? Or you could develop something for a really long time and realize, I should have dialed up this other aspect of that solution.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things I like about product management is it really just keeps you aware of the different dials and levers you can pull. You really have to think about what are all the possibilities. I'm going to try this one, for a while and see how it goes and measure it. But I keep in mind, what plans B, C, D, E, and F are,
Mm-hmm.
because that's, did you achieve your outcome or not is really what you
Mm-hmm.
should be looking at.
And in the decision making process to define why you're doing what you're doing with a specific product, does the customer come in play in regard to that? And why I ask this question is because I've had Shirk Sen on the podcast, who's also in product management. He spent a time doing a lot of customer support specifically, and this was actually very unorthodox to do it in a career. That gave a different perspective on what customers have troubles with regard to products, what they would like more of, and they gave them a general idea of how to really clearly state what is the goal with certain products. So for you, in the decision making process of clearly defining why you're doing what you're doing as a North Star, how does the customer come into play to that?
The customer perspective is hugely important, because ultimately a lot of what businesses want, right, the objectives they're trying to achieve are somewhat out of their control. Like if you
Mhm.
want to increase sales, that's great, but you're ultimately not the decision maker on whether a sale is made. The customer is. So you really have to do things to drive customer changes in their behavior, and to do that you have to understand them. But I would say that sometimes the objectives you're trying to achieve don't belong to the customer. There might be an internal operational change you want to make for efficiency's sake. And sometimes when you try to bring that operational efficiency to the customer's purview, like you're like, I did this internally, look at me. It can be very distracting, and it can be like, oh, well, that's not in my purview of caring. Why are you trying to show me all the things you did back here? I just really want to understand what I need
Right.
to know. And so I do think it's really important, but I think you can get off track when you think it has to play a part in every decision. And I
Right.
think I see that happen sometimes.
Well, that was actually one of the first things you mentioned is really defining why you're doing what you're doing. So making a decision on these things are very important. How do you find that fine line between involving the customer perspective and then making decisions that don't necessarily require their perspective all the time?
So ultimately, I start with what is it that you're trying to achieve? And let's talk about it quite a bit, because sometimes it's like actually four things tied up in a knot, right?
Hmm.
So the first thing is like what you're trying to achieve. And then it's like, okay, that's actually three different things. You've said it like it's one, you've made this like big kind of mission statement, but you're actually talking about three different objectives. So there's
Okay.
a bit of objective decomposition, right? And then when you look at what you're trying to achieve in these kind of very singular ways, right? Now, which of these are customer influenced? Which of these actually does the customer play a role in, and which don't,
Mhm.
right? And the ones that the customer plays a role in, now we go and talk to the customer and say, what are the kinds of things to change your relationship or your behavior that would drive the outcome that we're looking for, right? And they might say, you don't have a right to play there, or there's not that trust established yet. It might
Mhm.
give you pause to say maybe this is maybe we go down a different direction. But you really have to start. The stated problem is often a combination of lots of problems. You break those down, and then per
Mhm.
problem, which of these has customer, which does a customer have a role to play in?
Very interesting. So before we were talking on this podcast, we were talking about how you have a unique perspective on learning your way through this process versus doing it in a calculated way. I'd love to really know more about that perspective.
Sure. So I think that with a lot of the practice I've seen when it comes to product management is really like, we'll go do research, or we'll look at, data that we have inside. And then we'll make we won't call it this all the time. Like companies don't call it all the time, but we'll make like an implicit hypothesis. Like we think if we change this aspect of the product, we're going to see sales. And then there's a lot of, motion and business casing and Excel spreadsheets to kind of reinforce that vision, right? That's the way to go, that's the right answer. And I call it like smarts in your way to the answer, right? You think that if I can calculate, if I have this data, I know what's going to work. And I think that gets you part of the way there, but not all the way there. And what I
Right.
tell my teams is you want to understand, you want to do the research to get literate in the problem, right? Once you're literate in the problem, you can put forth a product change, to enter into the market to then learn from client behavior. Because
Mhm.
even the best client research you do, sometimes what clients say or what customers say versus what they do can be two very different things, right? And you might not have a
Very
perfect
good point. Very
translation.
good point.
Yeah.
I would like to say one thing about that. I actually spoke about this earlier. There's a on a different podcast. There's an acquisition from eBay, or eBay acquired Skype in 2005 under the perspective that Skype would allow the buyers and sellers on the marketplace be able to form a stronger relationship before the transaction, and that would lead to more transactions. However, what they were not able to predict, because it's human behavior and client behavior, is that these individuals were strangers. They did not want to converse on Skype, and that basically made the acquisition unfortunately unsuccessful. So that was a very good point you made there about the difference between learning your way through it and then using data, or the best data you could find about something, because data won't indicate human behavior all the time. So that was a really good point you made there. But my apologies, I did interrupt you, so please go ahead and continue.
No, I'm just it's just more reinforcement. You have to have both, because if you go straight to the market, unless your cost of experimentation and your like risk to the brand is extremely low, if you go to the market with all kinds of guesses, you can get it wrong, right? And you can get it wrong a lot. And so you want to do the research to kind of to understand the basic shape of the problem and the environment and the customer, to then put kind of like educated guesses into the market, right? Where you have a much higher likelihood of maybe not nailing it, like landing it right on target, but getting close enough that you can now adjust to be where you want to be. So without the research beforehand, you're kind of shooting in the dark, right? But without the testing in the market, you're being kind of presumptive, and you can kind of you could get to market, not have success, and throw it all away for no good reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to have the right balance, and the balance really depends by company and by product.
Very interesting. So there's a combination component there, but I would say that for you to understand this process, you probably had to do something a bit unorthodox earlier in the process. So, or earlier in your career, you had to do this in an unorthodox way. So when did you figure out that this was a more effective way than potentially what traditionally sold to you?
So in the latter chapter of my time at Charles Schwab, I was in charge of the new innovation accelerator they had set up at the time.
Okay.
And it was a really interesting environment because up until that point, I've been doing just straight product management. We want changes on a page. We put the requirements together. We get it to development. We get it to market. It was very operational in a way. And when we got to the innovation accelerator, it was a whole different story. It's like, here's a problem. We put a team of like 7 people on it for about 12 weeks. And we say, now try to solve that problem. Wasn't defined. Like, we didn't have a solution in mind. We had to understand, what could work with customers. And it was interesting because in that environment where you have a lot of very high achieving, very, type A personalities that are very good at delivering, when you put them in an environment where there's a lot of uncertainty, it kind of like wreaks havoc with the process. And so we had to kind of look at the process holistically and say, what are we trying to get out of this? Because this is really stressful for people, actually, because they really want to arrive at a win. They want to get a good grade or answer in the right way. And we said, that's not what this is. This is actually what you measure is not productivity in that environment. You measure learning, and you measure kind of like, your understanding changing of the problem space. And so there were times we get done with a particular lab and we wouldn't launch the product, but it would have saved the company a lot of money to not launch the product because we learned. And so that was a really aha moment for me, even watching, kind of from the oversight role of like, there's a lot of value in having both sides of this, really getting introduced to the experimentation side in a real life scaled way. But also remembering like we have to have bounds, we have to have guidelines, and we have to have an understanding before we go kind of try anything out.
Well, it's absolutely based on the truth, right? Because human behavior, especially if you're in product management and how the market would react to it, that's not a predictable factor. So I think having you kind of, in my opinion, have to have both. Otherwise, you can have situations that are unsuccessful acquisitions, like we've seen with eBay and Skype. So that's actually, I would argue, a critical part of the process, not something that should just be one unique way, which I think, by the way, is very, very good that you found out. But I like that. And what I would like to now shift this conversation to is more about the decision-making behind introducing new products to the market. I know this is something you've done a lot of it in your career. Every individual has their own unique process behind it, but I'll include one perspective I've learned thus far. And one perspective is that, and I can't be very specific because the individual who told me this perspective was under NDA, but the core principles of what he said was essentially that you identify core truths in one industry and one market, and if it's not already applied to a different industry, that's an opportunity to potentially apply those core truths to other industries. Essentially, that's one way to figure out if a product could be viable. But what is your decision-making process when it comes to introducing new products to the market?
So it has to start in my mind, and I think this was something that took me some time to kind of see clearer. But it has to start with what is your business strategy? Right? Like, what are you trying to do from a business point of view, regardless of any kind of opportunities? Because the truth is, you can look for a lot of litmus tests on where there might be opportunities in the market or other markets or, kind of adjacent areas. But there's usually, more ideas than there is resources. And so what can be really difficult is I can look out and I can see 3 different opportunities, all very lucrative opportunities, right? But only one of those is aligned to the actual business strategy. And what isn't obvious, I think, until you get about waist deep in the product development, product delivery path or journey is that if you don't have business support, a lot of things can waylay you, right? A lot of things can slow you down, make you trim back what you were trying to do, really kind of prevent you from putting into the market what you want to put into the market. So I think one of the things that is very important in my process with either, you know, helping clients or where I've worked in the past is understanding, like, what are we trying to accomplish at the business level? Because then I have a process to kind of distill that down to what then happens at the product level. And if we're launching 3 products, but you know, they're all kind of coherent in terms of they're aiming at the same business strategy, that's actually going to be more impactful than launching 3 entirely different products pointed in 3 different directions. And so that's step 1. And then step 2 starts to lean into, you know, what do we know about the customer? Like, what do we know about what we're trying to deliver? How does it align with other options they have, including, and this was drilled into me in business school, the option of not doing anything, right? Like, I think there's always, can I be better my competitor? Sure. But does your customer just not have the need strong enough or the desire or the resources to you know, buy what you're offering? So really understanding the customer, understanding kind of the demand, what the market looks like, understanding your ability to solve it. Because yes, technically it might be solvable, but you might not have the technology in place. And to get that technology in place might be a huge investment. So are you up for that? And I, you know, when I used to do this, when I used to advocate for changes and go back to executives, I was like, you can do anything. That's why I always, feasibility is always a bad word to me, because anything is feasible. It just gets really expensive, right? And so do you have the appetite to, you know, to spend this kind of investment for this kind of benefit that you're looking for? And if you don't, then just, you know, let's be honest about it. And that's okay. There are other things we can pursue. So for sure, I think you have to understand which direction the business is pointed in, because that's where you're going to get support. Then look at what your customers are willing to kind of, you know, where their needs are and where the demand is, where you have a space to enter or to succeed. And then, you know, a lot of it comes down to like helping, you know, the people who are building this thing, just getting out of their way and letting them build. You know, I've seen executives get really deep into like, all right, I want it to look like this. I want it to look like, no, you're not a designer. Like, leave that to the designer. I want it coded this way. You're not a software developer. Leave that to the architects and the developers. Get out of the way. Give them kind of the direction, give them what you're looking for structurally, and then move and let them do what they do, because that's how you're going to get to market quickest.
Excellent. I really like how you have a structured way of thinking in this process. First, really getting an idea, what is the goal? What are we trying to achieve? But not only doing that, but really understanding what does the mission statement mean? Because not only have you had an idea of what the mission statement is, but you also break it down. You do the decomposition. What parts are the customer involved in? What parts are we specifically involved in? That's a very interesting understanding, or important understanding, because that is a North Star, right? Really understanding what's going to be driving our actions, what's going to be driving the team execution, essentially. So I like that process, along with combining both really testing it in the market and then also being able to do it with the data. I think those are really integral from what we spoke about. And then I think that the process you have here is actually very interesting here. So what I'll do now is go ahead and shift this conversation to a little bit more about you, Raul. And the first question I have for you is, what is something about you or your life that you wish more people knew about?
That's a great question. I think that I from my early, I think my early career, I grew up in an environment where I believe that, like, to succeed, I had to achieve and achieve and achieve and achieve. And to a large degree, I did that. I worked really hard, and I you know, I got to these different points and these different successes. Now that I have kids at home, and you know, I'm a little older, it's a little bit of a different mindset. And instead of just working like hard and working and doing as many things as I could, it's really about choosing the right challenges for me, right? And it's about really kind of taking care of myself, like the engine for me, of like driving all of those efforts, and that includes like a lot of hobbies. So I do a lot of gardening. I you know, do a lot of work in our front and backyards. And I do, you know, when I can, I do a fair amount of baking. Now, it's funny, if you ask a lot of product manager folks, like what their hobbies are, they land in these woodworking as well, but it's always making things, right? So for me, I think that, you know, at first blush, when I talk to people, they might not understand that I do have a lot of hobbies where I make things. And I think that's just really an outlet for my personality type of like bringing something anything really into the world.
Yeah, awesome. What would you say is the biggest change between you in your 20s and you now?
Well, it's hard. You just, I think you don't have as much energy sometimes, right? And you have a lot more like depend on how your life goes, right? So I got married, I have 3 kids. Your responsibilities diverge quite a bit. You got a lot more to take care of. You got a lot, and the people you're in charge of have things that they have to take care of. So it's almost like a organizational tree of responsibilities. And so it makes you, I think I'm a lot more organized now than I was in my 20s. I'm a lot more, I laugh because when I talk to clients about prioritization and how they need to like be better at prioritization, I recognize that in my own life. Like I have to be very ruthless in prioritization because there's one of me and sometimes I've got to be in 3 or 4 different places. So I would say definitely more organized, definitely more choosy about how to like spend time and effort to make sure that it's going to the things that are most important or the things that unlock other things. And I think people that I know in the same kind of stage in life have the same reactions.
Yeah, and I think it's something you have to because time is limited and you're only here for a certain time. It's not very much guaranteed either. So I think that's a very important process to go through. Now, what I'll do now is go ahead and share a very quick and concise perspective regarding fitness and health, and we'll go ahead and conclude with your plans for this year, whether that'll be professionally or personally. So the perspective I really want to share today is going to be very, very concise. I would just start off by coming up with coming up or telling you a more an idea that's being sold to you in the fitness industry, which I think is kind of misleading a lot of individuals, which is that you have to attend to a gym or a fitness routine for 10, 12 hours a week. And the idea is a lot of what individuals tell you is that you need to go to the gym about 4 or 5 times a week. That's including commute, that's including taking a shower, that includes a lot of different things, right? That's a 10 to 12 hour commitment. The issue with that perspective is that it's not really what drives what you're trying to achieve, which for many people is losing weight or losing fat. What I would say is really consolidate what the requirements are first. I think you had a really good perspective on decomposition. If we can bring things down to its core truths and then build upon those truths, I think that's really what we want to do here. And if you identify the mechanism behind weight loss, according to the National Institute of Health, is basically just achieving a negative energy balance. And what that means in simple terms is having the right movement and having the right calorie intake. But out of these two, what takes the time is the movement, right? Like we discussed. So how can you do that in a time efficient way? So instead of focusing on a location dependent strategy, which is at like a studio or gym, I think focusing on something location independent would be very helpful. Why I say this is because if you can do something anytime and anywhere, as opposed to one fixed location, it's going to be a lot more effective than having to always shift your entire schedule around for this one thing to do, right? That's what I would say is going to be really foundational. What I would recommend, I would say from my experience, is leveraging something like step count, because that's something you can do essentially while you're listening to this podcast. You can do that while you're traveling. You can do that while you're taking a business call. You can do that essentially wherever there's essentially ground, and you can multitask while doing this. So that's really the idea. Can you consolidate the requirements of the problem and come up with a more effective pathway to achieve those requirements? It's really what I would say here. And this is actually what I use to lose over 70 pounds and to keep it off myself. So hopefully that provided a new perspective to the audience and gave a different perspective, hopefully, on how to be time efficient. So with that, we'll go and conclude the fitness conversation, and we'll go ahead and move on to Raul's plans for this year.
Well, real quick on just on the fitness part. I mean, I loved your take there, and I would say like almost in line of that decomposition. I used to do triathlons, and like maybe like 15 years ago, and I looked at my fitness in 3 different. I broke it down, true to form.
Yeah.
It was really around strength, right, which was one kind of training, but your heart capacity, almost like the heart is its own muscle, which cycling did a lot for, but like other things didn't, like weightlifting didn't necessarily. And then nutrition, like how does the nutrition fit in? And so, for me, it was like, which day, today's a Tuesday or Thursday or whatever it was, what am I going to focus on of these 3? It wasn't just straight, working out or fitness. It was like, which of these categories? I might be doing something that's pure cardio. I don't expect to get necessarily stronger, but it's important to like increase my like pulmonary strength, right? Or my cardio strength. Mm-hmm. So this year, I think, as with everything, AI is very, very influential in how work is being done and kind of changing. And so my team and I are really focused on, in our environment, in the consulting environment, like how do we use this kind of tooling to produce, or to kind of like guide, or not guide, what's the word I'm looking for? To amend and enable the work we do. AI
Okay.
is really good for research. It's really good to like go and like find out, like give me some starting points to think about. But for what we do is very, very bespoke kind of design, very bespoke solutioning. And so nothing ever looks like the thing we just did. It's kind of a new leaf every time. And so that's a hard, there's not an easy way to kind of reuse what's in what we would call like the data lake, right, to produce something new. But there are interesting ways to applying it to the work. And so that's been a challenge in terms of like how do we use the tooling that the companies like invested in, but do it in a way that doesn't at all, only improves, doesn't degrade kind of the work that we do. So yeah, I've been playing with lots of tools, getting kind of a sense like, hey, this is the part, in the process where this one would work, or this is the part in the process where this is useful. And actually we started like stamping things for our clients and their materials of like, when you're at this step, here's a good chance to actually try out AI, right? This step, not so much, but this step for sure. And so, yeah, I think like every other person, this is kind of top of mind. And this is one of the things that we focused on.
Excellent. Well, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. Make sure to check out Raul's LinkedIn. It's going to be tagged below. Raul, do you have any specific place you think that there's a better potential place to find out more about you?
No, LinkedIn's a great place to start. Like I said, running around like usual with 3 little ones. So, but LinkedIn is where I try to keep most of my most up-to-date posts and information shares.
Awesome. Well, this is Aryan Mohindra and Raul Rodriguez. Thank you for listening.